Welcome back to Unlearn with Bianca. On this podcast, we explore everything around self-healing, health, personal growth, the mind-body connection, relationships, and more. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Before we jump into it today, a quick reminder for those living in Christchurch. This Sunday on the 21st of June, I am running an event called Embodied. This one is designed to help you return to your body, release tension, have fun. We've got 3 tickets remaining. I'm going to put all of the details in the show notes. A lot of people are coming along by themselves. So if you've been on the fence about it, you've been wanting to try something new, and it's a little bit out of your comfort zone, here is your sign. Come and join us. So today's episode, some of you guys will have seen, I think it was last month, there was a trending reel on Instagram. And the guy says very bluntly, you have to be a bitch, otherwise you will get an autoimmune disease. And that's all he said on it. And it went viral. And I looked at the comments and there were hundreds of women that were commenting about their experience with autoimmune issues and saying how they related to this. So let's get into it today. I did put a post up last month on Instagram around this, but I want to go into it in a little bit more detail. As somebody who works with chronic symptoms a lot, who has been unwell myself, there is some truth to this. I want to give you guys an understanding as to why it's actually important to step into this bitch energy, why it is related to our health and the science behind that, and then some things to think about, some tips to take away. I'm going to kick us off by saying that autoimmune issues affect far more women than men. In fact, they say that women are more likely, 3 to 4 times more likely to experience an autoimmune issue or disease over men. Now, there are a few reasons as to why this is. I think there could be many theories. I've done a bit of research as to why this may be. One piece of the puzzle is that women's systems have more responsive immune systems, which is partly due to the evolutionary process as women are bearing children and raising their offspring. They have higher emotional and relational attunement. So our nervous systems are more relationally based, meaning that there can be more input to process through our nervous systems. And as we know, women also have more hormonal fluctuation across cycles and across life. What this really means is that women are just more intensely impacted by immune, endocrine, and nervous system events. And there is greater caregiving load and emotional labor in many contexts, and that's for many different reasons. And most importantly, women's stress physiology tends to be more internalized. We internalize stress more. And this is what I really want to get into today, because this pattern is making or keeping us sick. Okay. So yes, on one hand, some of this is biological, but on the other hand, there are so many patterns that have become ingrained through societal pressure, through belief systems, through what we were taught. And this is the bit we're going to hone in on. You might be sitting there thinking, Bianca, tell me why being a bitch would be beneficial for your health. I don't want to be a bitch. And I was thinking about it, and I was actually thinking, you know what? I want to change this word. I want to swap this word out, because when I think of the word bitch, it actually has a negative connotation. It implies a difficult woman. It implies resistance. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to replace the word bitch, and we are replacing it with a woman who is in her own space and energy to the point that self-abandonment is not a consistent, regular thing. So she is putting her needs in the picture. Because let's be honest, that kind of woman often is deemed as a bitch or self-centered. That's a whole other conversation we're not going to have today. But the words that are really coming to mind are power, clarity, honesty, and boundaries. That is a woman who is in her own space. So here's what I see over and over and over again with my clients. And I recognize many of these patterns in myself too. And these are patterns I've been working on over time, ever since really I recovered from chronic pain. The women that are the most conscientious, the most generous, the most empathetic, overgiving, over-responsible, The ones whose life is organized around duty and have many external expectations placed on them, unfortunately, they are the ones that are at the highest risk for chronic disease and autoimmune issues. It is the ones who were taught to prioritize harmony over their own truth. It is the ones that are so aware of everybody else's experience and everybody else's feelings that they override their own signals without even realizing it. Becomes that habitual. Now, this isn't something that I've just witnessed with my clients. This is actually widely reported. Dr. Gabor Mate, he also talks about the different personality types, which I don't even really like to call them personalities, but the different patterns, let's call them, that tend to get sick. And he says time and time again that this type of woman is more prone to disease. Now, as I just said, I feel this so strongly, and I always feel like I need to repeat it because this is something I'm so passionate about. These are not personality traits per se. These are patterns often learned early, and they shape so much of what we feel love is, what we feel familiar with, and what we avoid not to be abandoned. So, for example, if our nervous system has learned through early experiences and watched certain caregivers give and give and give, and we learn that self-sacrifice equates to our worthiness, that how we are perceived by other people is more important than how we actually feel inside, then we end up constantly seeking outside of ourselves for approval. And then over time, we start abandoning our own internal needs until that just becomes like a autopilot thing. Self-abandonment is really what we're talking about here. And it's such an intelligent response because it's not a conscious thing. It's your nervous system going in to find a way to get a need met for you. That need might be love, it might be connection, it might be that feeling and that high of feeling like we belong, the worthiness. I'll give you one of my examples. I used to do this so much. I was so good at anticipating everybody else's feelings and how people might respond and overly reading the room and just watching all these subtle cues, everyone else's needs, before they even had to ask or say something. I could really easily, and I still can, but I've fine-tuned this, I could step into other people's shoes. I could sense their emotions, even if they were saying they were fine, I could sense they weren't. And due to the fact that I was able to do that really well, and I wanted to fit in, I would just adjust myself around what I think they needed and say what I think they needed to hear. I was so tired of always finding myself in the position of being like, how did I get here? What about me? Why am I jumping in to save or respond like this? But really, it was that need I was trying to meet for myself, which was acceptance and feeling like I was enough. So self-abandonment and things like this, being overly empathetic, it can be seen on the surface as something that's really positive, but actually it's a bit of a sneaky one because it was really me just trying to meet my own needs. But that has issues over time because you're constantly diluting yourself or you're finding yourself in environments which are quite out of alignment. If you're resonating to this, people might describe you as kind and easygoing or selfless, but underneath there's actually this subtle fear, which is, if I disappoint them, if they're upset with me, if they're unhappy, what does that mean about me? So really it's being driven by this wound of not feeling enough. Another way of abandoning myself that I would do quite frequently is saying it's okay or I'm fine when I wasn't. I was also really good at going along with conversations, even if I didn't agree with something, because I couldn't be bothered speaking up and then dealing with the resistance and then being rejected. So I would swallow how I really felt just to go along to keep the peace, because connection can feel safer in those instances than risking the potential rejection that might come with honesty. This was such a normalized thing for me to do that it wasn't until I actually had chronic pain and I was forced to look at some of my patterns that I realized that this wasn't my personality, it was me trying to protect myself. I'll give you some other examples of self-abandonment. You could be self-abandoning when you say, I understand versus I feel. When we are saying, I understand why you're the way you are, and so therefore I can cut you some slack, or I understand that this happened to you, and I see that pattern, and that pattern, that takes us out of our feeling body. You might understand something, but your feelings might be like, yeah, but I deserve more than this. So when we're consistently intellectualizing, we might be self-abandoning. When we are not asking for help when we need it, or when we're offered help and we say, no, it's fine, but you really need it, that can be a form of self-abandonment. Self-abandonment can also come in when you're over-explaining your boundaries to people so they won't be upset with you. And another one I'm sure most of us have experienced, saying yes to opportunities that don't align because you're worried about letting people down. Now, if we do these patterns every now and then, it's not really a major thing, but the more we do these, the more consistent we slip into these patterns, that becomes chronic self-abandonment, and that's where we come across an issue. When you are chronically abandoning yourself for the sake of being a good person, it keeps the nervous system in a hypervigilant state. And this is because there is a mismatch between what you truly feel internally, or what your body's showing you, versus what you're expressing externally, or your actions. When we're in this space where what's going on internally does not match what's going on externally, the nervous system gets the cue that something is off. So how does all of this actually relate to an autoimmune disease? What does it feel like when you're constantly lacking boundaries? It feels like anxiety and it feels like exhaustion. What does it feel like when you're constantly suppressing and holding in your truth just to keep the peace? It feels like tension and it feels like exhaustion. What does it feel like when you're overreading the room and everybody's cues and you're stepping into everyone's shoes first? That feels like hypervigilance and stress. So when we are running these self-abandonment patterns, your system activates into that stress response. And when we are in that consistently, our HPA axis is chronically activated. Your HPA axis is basically your body's main stress response system. It's the communication loop between your brain and your adrenal glands, and that helps you respond to stress and then come back down again. When this is chronically activated, we're not coming back down into the rested parasympathetic state. It becomes our physiology because inflammation rises, hormones then dysregulate, the immune system gets, we could call it confused messages, and then the gut becomes reactive. So we have this whole body system thrown off. All of this is happening at a very physiological level. And chronic stress is sneaky because things that we say are normal now, like new aches and pains, tiredness you can't shake, brain fog, these are the first cues that we're living in a state of chronic stress until further down the track, it can be labeled as dis-ease or even in some cases an autoimmune issue. The body is always keeping the score, and it is keeping the score when you are consistently swallowing your needs, your voice, just to keep the peace. And it tries to give us symptoms to look at when the body is saying, no, this is enough. So let's bring it all the way back to the start. What does being a bitch have to do with any of this? When a woman who has been self-abandoning then decides to start practicing clarity, honesty, owning her energy, boundaries, we could call that starting to be more of a bitch, something shifts. It is like a big exhale for the nervous system for someone who has been in chronic self-abandonment. Because what happens when that same woman is starting to embody a new energy, decides to no longer abandon herself to the same level, things start coming back into balance in our physiology. There is what is called congruence again. And congruence means what she is expressing is now in line with how she is feeling. And that is what I truly have been thinking about this so much lately. That state of alignment of how you feel internally is matched with what's coming out of your mouth externally. That is really what puts us into a healing state. Now, don't get me wrong. I feel like as women, we have so much conditioning that is placed upon us. There are many people in unsafe situations. I understand there's lots of complexities, but I believe that that congruence of really being able to be in alignment with our words and our actions, that is just the best thing we can do for our nervous system when we are given the opportunity to practice it. Here's some examples of how it would actually look. So it's when someone stops suppressing their own needs and their own anger just to keep the peace. Because healthy anger is so important and it is a protective signal. When we have this urge to feel angry, it's actually a sign that something here is not aligned with me, or I do not agree with this. It's not within my value system. So when someone starts getting in touch with the anger and actually accepting that anger is healthy, that can be a massive relief to the nervous system. Usually, if someone's been in a shutdown state for a long time, anger can be quite hard to access because it's got a real activation feeling, and that can feel quite foreign to people that have been shut down, stuck in shame cycles. So it's a whole other conversation, but anger is a really, really healthy emotion. Channeled in the right way, of course. Another example of a woman who stops self-abandoning, she is able to stay with herself even when there is tension around. So even if someone doesn't agree with her, she's able to be with those uncomfortable feelings. Even if someone says, don't you feel guilty for that? She's able to sit with that and still take steps forward. So it's being able to be with that tension and discomfort. It's someone who stops sourcing safety from everyone else around them and instead start finding it within themselves first. A woman who centers her own energy, she is clear, she is loving, and she begins to understand that she can't keep betraying herself for the sake of a relationship. She realizes that it's actually not her responsibility to read the room first, because others actually have a responsibility to communicate how they feel and what their needs are. That doesn't take it away from being considerate, empathetic. It's just that others too have a responsibility for how they communicate. A woman who puts herself at the center, she says no when she doesn't have the capacity to do something that she does not want to do, or she'll be doing it from a place where she's not fully in it. She also allows people to support her if she needs it. If she is needing support, she accepts support rather than says no because it would mean she was perceived a certain way. If someone is starting to practice these habits, do you know how much energy this frees up? It frees up so much energy because women's bodies stop overactivating stress response symptoms when they stop abandoning themselves to maintain connection, because that is what most of it comes down to. Because what actually happens at that physiological level, if that threat in the system is lowered, the body stops bracing. And all of that energy that was going into just maintaining survival mode, it then gets reprioritized back into other organs and other systems in the body, such as the immune system. So energy starts flowing back into the immune system and the healing systems. And that is why when people come to me and they really shift their habits and their nervous system responses, they then get their health back because energy is reprioritized. Now, one thing I have learned as someone who has come a long way with this, but still, has stuff pop up here, there, in certain situations, it's not in one big life decision that we change from self-abandoning to not self-abandoning. It actually happens in all these micro decisions, and it really happens when we are willing to look at our part to play in our patterns and dynamics and look at where we can take our power back. I think a really good way to explore this and to find out where you might be self-abandoning is to look at the language that seems to be looping frequently. So it could be, I'm just so tired. I feel like I have to do everything. They always take advantage of my kindness. I don't want to hurt their feelings. That could be one. It could be, I just feel like if I'm not there, no one's going to be there and they won't be able to do X. So that's like an over-responsibility wound coming up there. Someone else might get into the loop of like, it's just not worth it. There's no point in speaking up because they'll never get it. They don't listen to me. That could be a wound around expressing, or one that was running for me for a long time of, if I share what I really think, then they're going to judge me, or if I disagree, then they might reject me. So I'm just going to keep it palatable and I'm just going to go along with things. So that was the type of conversation that was replaying in my head in certain situations. Or actually, one more for the people who are working through hyper independence wounds, there could be consistent thought loops you get yourself into around, I need the support. I know that they said they could be there, but I don't want them to worry about me. So that is a wound around receiving. If we can start just becoming more aware of the stories we tell ourselves, that is point one. That just gets us into awareness of what patterns might we be running that are outdated, that are causing us to abandon ourselves. And there is no shame in this whatsoever. It's all just about having that awareness and then choosing to do things differently in these tiny choices. I will be real though, and some people won't want to hear this, but a lot of us are making ourselves sick or putting our body into the conditions to get disease by focusing on how we look externally to others or how we're perceived externally, rather than honoring how we're actually feeling. And if this is new territory for you, putting yourself in the picture, and it feels so uncomfortable and so scary, like it has done for me at many points, think about and connect into the people that you really respect. Because the people that I respect the most, they're not people that are just yes people. They are people that have strong opinions. They are people that are respected because they are convicted in their value system. And they're not people that just agree with everybody. And I think we need more of that. We need to be able to respect other people's opinions, but also really tune into what is important to us as well. And I'm telling you now in the most loving way possible that no diet, no protocol, no supplement is going to have the same effect as coming home to your own needs and actually just starting to get curious about what they are. That is the medicine. When you start to do this, you don't stop caring about everyone else. You just finally start caring about yourself. And if you're in the process of doing this, then I am so proud of you, because I get it. I get that it is a process and it is an unlearning and a relearning. And on that final note, I will actually circle all the way back to what I said at the start. There are a few tickets left for Embodied this weekend. And I want to end on this because at Embodied, we are really going to be stepping into our power. We are going to be taking up space. So if you are a woman who is ready to do that, then do come along. I will also put the links to the lightning process, brain and nervous system retraining in the show notes, so you guys can check that out if you're interested. I think I've got one more space for a one-to-one client in July. As always, please reach out if you have any questions. If you would like me to do a particular episode, please make sure you rate this podcast if you haven't already. Share it with family or friends or anyone that you think would benefit from it. And for those of you who have already done that, thank you so much for continuing to support me. See you guys on the next episode.